Chapter 11. I think, looking at it, that it's where they threw everything in that they were intending to cover some point in the book, and I don't think they really went back and looked at what they had down there at the end and did their final edit on it they'd planned to. Because on the very first page of the chapter is a giveaway that this thing's not correct. Because the first sentence tells us that this chapter includes new material, new content to cover the additional on the CCNA routing and switching exam. Parentheses, need exam number here. Okay? The new exam's been out before this book came out, because this is written based on the new exam that came out last year. Okay? They didn't insert the exam number there, and that sentence sort of reads like that's just a reminder to them of what they were doing in this chapter, and really wasn't intended to be even there for y'all to read. Okay? The next part is the chapter goes on forever. There is 70 pages in this chapter. So I think it's the longest chapter in the whole book. Okay? If it's not, I'm surprised. Because when you look at the others, it looks like the longest one, except for possibly chapter 7, which is IP addressing, which you remember there was a lot of stuff in that one, just to cover it that they talked on. They've titled it Build a Small Network, and then they go through and they cover a hodgepodge of information, with a lot of it actually covered through the rest of the book. Okay, so it's not new information necessarily always there for you. So everybody follow on that? So first thing they talk about is the devices in a small business network. And that they tell you a little bit on that, which basically is your PCs, a server in a lot of cases out there. Usually that server's just as a data server, data/file server, depending on what you want to call it. A switch sitting there, possibly some phones or something else on it, possibly not. And then your LAN connection out there, which is going to be your router sitting there. That's your router/modem/switch. Okay? Modem's what it's going to usually be called, and it's really more router and switch. If I wait long enough, everybody will get here. There was only 3 students in here when I walked in at 10. And I know where John is today, so I know that one. And I was going, did everybody else decide that because John was going to go play golf, that they could go goof off? I don't know where a couple more. Those of you that came in late, make sure before you leave that I mark you as here. Okay? And since it's 2 more of you since I went over the first thing, so I'll go back and hit that. This is a confusing chapter in the first place. Written final is just your normal final. It's just like all your other tests. I've just called it written. If you got a better term I can put on it, it'll work fine. You've got a lab final, and then you've got the other one. That's the one, which is the one you're going to come 2 weeks from last Tuesday to take in class, but it's going to be just like your written test. So it's the multiple choice questions you're used to. That's actually, unless they've changed on it, it's actually questions out of the other test. Okay?
What chapter are they going to cover? All of it?
They'll cover all of them. So they'll cover all 11 chapters. Okay? Should be that it'll be somewhere around 50 questions. Which is twice as many as your normal test. Cisco does odd on their default timing of it, where their default for the test is an hour, which is way too long for 25 questions. Where they come up with that from, because they don't give you that time on their certification exam. Normally on certification exams, you get 1.25 minutes per question, which is what I'm doing for most of my tests, and that's what I've sort of switched y'all closer to, but not really, because really I've switched y'all down to about 2 minutes, because now I've changed it to where we're doing 45 minutes for the test, which is way extra time on it anyway, okay? For the final, which is twice as many questions, if they've been by default assigning an hour for 25 questions, how long would you assume they would assign for 50 questions? 2 hours, right? They do a default time of 1 hour and 15 minutes. I can't figure that out. I've always switched it to double the time of what I give on the test, so y'all get 1.5 hours on it, okay? Because if it's twice as many questions, it should be the same amount of time per question, should be the way it's working from. So since I've gone to giving y'all 45 minutes on the test now, which is still, like I say, almost 2 minutes a question. Well, it really is 2 minutes a question, because y'all don't get 25 questions on the test. They only give y'all somewhere 20, 21 questions, even though they say there's a 25 question test. Apparently the people at Cisco have never gotten through Math 098 yet. Okay? Or maybe Math 090, I'm not sure. When they can't tell 25 from 2021. So we'll do that. But that's what the written final is. Is everybody clear on that one? So, same thing as you've been seeing. I called it written final because effectively as written, you're really not writing, but it's not like some of y'all were scared of that you had to write an essay or something for me. It's just multiple choice questions like normal. But you're not doing it written, but you're doing a written type thing, as opposed to your other final is the lab final, which I've called it lab final for that. And so I hope those keep it clearer, but apparently it's not as clear right now. I've had the question in my test out class also about where I've got a written final for them. And then remember, you're doing that on Tuesday, May the 2nd at the normal time, okay? So you're not doing it online. You will be doing it on the computer, but you're not doing it at your convenience at home. You're coming in to do it. Does that make sense now? Which is what I've done for all of my in-person classes. The finals are being done here. And I may go to on the online classes in the future on that, but I can't change. Well, I could change that in the middle of the semester on them and tell them they got to come in to do it, but I really can't do that. As far as school is concerned, I could do it, but as far as my thinking is, no, I can't change things in the middle of it. Okay? You're already coming every day anyway, so that wasn't an odd different one for you. Chapter 11 has a little of everything in here. And it is 70 pages long and covers a bunch of things we've already talked about and covers a lot of other stuff. It's like a hodgepodge of where they threw everything together in. Previous editions of the book, they just went through and showed you what they said on it, build a small network, and just showed the basics of what you needed to do to create your own little network. Because through the rest of the book, we've really kept talking in terms of large networks. So this was sort of to bring it back together for you to realize that what you've learned through the book works for a small network as well as for a large network. Okay? Which I've tried to tell you in class anyway, but the books always come from the approach of large networks when they looked at everything else. Because if you thought about some of the stuff that you go, wouldn't use that on a little network or whatever, and here they're talking about for a small business only got a few computers or whatever. Could be a small manufacturing plant, could be a doctor's office, could be a lawyer's office, whatever, or it could be your home network, okay? This type of stuff's going to apply to. Is everybody following what they're defining as a small network? Which is a lot of places that you're very liable to go work around here. As opposed to that if you lived in the big cities or whatever, you may well go work for some large place that's got a large network. Okay, although we've got some large networks around here too, because y'all are sitting here working on one right now, because the network for the school is a large network. All right, so they mention about those basic devices, and then they talk about the device selection. Well, it basically comes back to the same thing we said about for the large ones, because whether you're building a large network or a small network, it's going to be the same considerations to buy a device. One, and this is going to be your biggest consideration usually on it, although you'd like to think it was something else, but really cost is going to be the biggest consideration. How much is it going to cost, and that people are going to want to try to go the cheaper way on it. It's going to be very seldom you're going to find somebody that cost is not a consideration, and not probably their biggest consideration. I have heard of a couple of places that cost was not a consideration on doing some networking stuff, and they got some fancy stuff. I've worked for a few places that have told me that they didn't worry about the cost on it because they knew I was worrying about the cost on it, that I was buying it just like I was them. And so whatever I requested from them, they approved for me. But that was again cost built in it. They just passed it down to me to make the decision instead of them making the decision. They were going to, that was my recommendation after I'd worked for them just a short amount of time. They knew I was going to spend their money like it was my money, and that I was tight on the money. As opposed to some people would go in and look at it and go, it's their money, not my money, and proceed to want to just spend right and left. And that wherever clients I've had, I've always spent it, tried to keep it down as low as I can on what it costs for them. Because sometimes when I've given them some choices, they've actually chosen to go the more expensive route. And then I gave them a cheaper one, but I told them what was the difference on the two. So cost is consideration. Speed and types of ports and interfaces, that's a consideration, and should be a pretty important consideration for you. Is this equipment, how fast is it going to run? And the other part with that speed part on it is how long is it going to be good for us? Because if you're spending some money on the equipment, you don't want it where you're going to have to replace it in a year. Again, that plays back to the cost on it though also. You may spend a little bit more now, but you know if you spent a little bit more now, you're not going to have to buy again as soon, and so that's going to save you some money longer term. Now sometimes you're talking with people, they don't look at that part at all. It's how much can we save today, and we'll worry about next year, and they end up spending a lot more on it. Expandability is the third one, and don't just buy what it is absolutely that they got to have for right now, but allow for it to expand in the future. Businesses and everything should be expanding. Stuff on the computer, you're going to need more stuff in the future than you need now. Okay, now agreed, the machines are going to get cheaper and that they're going to have higher capabilities as we go on along, but plan for some growth on it. If you're buying a switch for them, if they've got 4 machines already there that they're going to plug into it, don't buy them a switch that only has 4 ports. Get one that's got more than 4 ports. So yeah, 4 ports will work for them right now, but as soon as they add one more person there and then another computer plugged into it, it doesn't work any longer. You're going to have to figure out a way to either replace that switch again or add another switch into the process there. So you got to spend some more stuff on it. Go ahead and look at allowing expansion on it. Second thing is ports will go bad on switches. So if one of the ports goes bad, if you've got every port in use, you've got no choice but you're going to have to go buy another switch. If you've got spare ports sitting there that you're not using yet, you can just switch that person over to another port, and you don't have to buy equipment yet. Does everybody follow on that? So, should be some expansion for various reasons. One, most businesses are going to be expanding. And two, that you need that ability of just some spareness to it, okay? So they talk about that IP addressing. They talk about, think about all your devices and develop your IP addressing for it. We talked about that back in that other big chapter. Redundancy. Think about if you can do some redundancy in it. In a small network, you may well not have redundancy there, but you could do some. You could do some redundant cabling to have a different ways on it, but you're most likely only going to have one connection outside to the outside world. A larger organization may have two, so if one goes down, you can keep on going on the other one. But on a small organization, if that one connection goes down, you're just sunk. And then they talk about be aware of what your traffic is out there and plan accordingly on that. They talk about what they've defined as applications and protocols. This stuff's going to be the same type things for those next few pages as we already talked about through the book. They use the same protocols the large ones do. So they mention on those again. Where's 11 dash? That's interesting. Common network protocols are shown in figure 11-6. And 11-6 is a picture of what all their network services are on different servers. So that's not your protocols. So they don't even have their illustrations matching up. And those that walked in late, the very first sentence in the chapter shows this chapter really wasn't finished when they published it. Because the end of the very first sentence says, insert exam number here. And the exam, this book was written about the new exam, so they knew what the exam was all along on it. They never even got that done. I don't think they came back and really paid attention to what was in 11 and that they threw everything together here. And figuring they were going to do something more with it and didn't. They talk about that there's voice and video applications, so you could have that going on out there. And infrastructure we already mentioned, voice over IP, you may well be putting in a place now, and that you may be using voice over IP at home and not really realize it. If any of you are using Vonage, you are using voice over IP. If you're getting your telephone service through your cable provider, Comcast will sell you telephone service. You're not using a landline for that, you're using voice over IP. Okay? Now in some cases where you're getting your internet through the telephone company, it's vice versa, and so on. Chickamauga Telephone advertises about the fact they're doing fiber to the pole on it, but they tell you that you have to buy a landline with them, and they're telling you why you ought to pay up to $30 a month for that, plus your internet service, which I think they got some good arguments, because the landline's always going to be working for you. If you're using voice over IP, if the internet's down, your phone's down. Okay? If the power goes off, voice over IP doesn't work. Your landline still works because the landline's powered itself on its separate little powering running across the line at the 5 volts or whatever it runs at. So I sort of like having a landline still around because that gives you actually a better emergency communication there. And as long as it keeps down to a minimal cost on it's one thing. Now in my case, I don't have a landline in my apartment up here. I had Vonage up here for a year or so. I had a landline initially. No, I had Vonage initially when I got up here, and then I realized after a year I never even used the phone for anything, and so I got rid of it. That I'd gone to using myself. and that they talk about that you could to be aware of that, what I just told you a moment ago. Have this thing designed so it'll scale into being a larger network, that you won't have to redo everything when suddenly you become a larger network. It could be that if this is for a business, that your business gets bought out, or you buy out another business, and so now your business is just doubled in size or whatever. And that happens plenty out there. So you do want to be aware of that, and to have it planned as best you can. Now, if you go to that drastic of a change, you're probably going to have to redo your network to a degree of it anyway. They talk about network security, and they throw a number of things here. And actually, most of these things we've already talked about, because small networks subject to the same attacks and problems as the big network. Doesn't get as much publicity usually as much, because if we attack one of y'all's network at home, it's not going to be CNN News. But if you're running the computers for some large company around and it's attacked, it may make the big news, okay? And be the same attack used in both cases. So they talk about if a hacker gets into your network, that they tell you four different things could occur from it. Information theft, they could get in and steal information from you. And remember, not all hackers are wanting to do that, okay? Some hackers are wanting to do other stuff to it, so they could be combinations of these. Data loss or manipulation, so it could be them wanting to steal the information, or maybe them just wanting to destroy the information, okay? That student getting into the school network, maybe wanting to steal some information, but another alternative, maybe they wanted to they failed this semester, so they want to destroy their student records out there so there's no record of them failing. And that is realistic, okay? Don't do it, because it's not going to do you any good. That we back up of one way or another, and that we still remember who we gave what grade to, and remember the grades are kept in my GNTC. And where I'm doing all the stuff on you is in Blackboard, and those are two totally different systems at two different locations. My GNTC's here at the college. Blackboard's sitting up in Indiana, I think it is, or somewhere. All that stuff's sitting somewhere else, so you'd have to hack another system on that one. Third one's identity theft. They're not looking to steal information as so much information off your machine as just to steal the information about you, so then they can go out and impersonate you to do all kinds of stuff and run up all kinds of charges. Probably not that big of a threat to y'all on it, because if I manage to steal one of y'all's social security numbers and I get your bank account number and go down and want to go drain your bank account, and probably in most of y'all's cases, if I went to drain your bank account, that you're going, well, that's not going to get you real far. That one, you got to have a bank account, and two, that me getting a nickel out of you is not going to do me a whole lot of good. Okay? So probably not y'all's accounts, but there's plenty of others, and hopefully within a few years when y'all got some really good jobs, that then it might be worth my while to come drain your bank account. But hopefully y'all remember who I was and what I did for you, getting you going, and that I was the reason you're making all this money, so you're sharing it with me anyway. Or offering me all of these free vacations around the world and everything, and just sending me off to do all kinds of stuff. Y'all are going to do that, right? Good. So, and then the last one is disruption of service, to just disrupt the service there. And you see that in numerous ways, but shut their computer down. Because if it's a business that does lots of orders, if you just go in and prevent them from being able to make orders, you're damaging their business just as well as if you went in and stole the data off there or went and emptied their bank account. You could be doing more harm to them. So things you need to be aware of. Physical security. They talk about several different physical threats. We've really talked about those along the way. Hardware threats, where there's physical damage to the equipment done. Somebody gets into the room where our servers are sitting at, or our routers and switches, and just physically damages them. That they take the sledgehammer in there, or they go to doing whatever to them and destroy the equipment where it doesn't work anymore. So you do want the equipment secured. Now, in a large business, it's going to be in a separate locked room. In a small business, that stuff may be in the room with somebody else there, because it's only one box or two boxes sitting there, and that you're not going to keep it off into a separate room, but that their room should be secured. That if they're not in there, their door should be locked or whatever. And then a small one, it's a little bit easier to monitor who's coming in and coming out. So it may not be quite as well locked up on it, but you know you've got it well secured in that case anyway. So that securing it for a small business versus for the school on just this campus here may be two different things, because a small business where everybody comes through the front door and the receptionist knows up there who should be coming through or whatever, versus here, they don't know who should be coming into the building and being around in the building at places. We could tighten further down on it like a lot of places have, but still you'd have people wandering in and out that you don't know for sure on. Okay? Environmental threats, making sure that the room stays, wherever you're keeping the equipment, that it's being kept temperature and humidity good. We talked about those before. Electrical threats, we've talked about those before. Protecting the equipment against surges and everything else, and UPSs to keep it all running and such. And then maintenance threats, and that is, do we have spare parts around? Is the cabling done good? Was it done correctly and stuff? And is there different things on that? Vulnerabilities, they talk about several different things on that. They break it into technological vulnerabilities, where they talk about TCP/IP protocol weaknesses, that some of your protocols are inherently insecure. HTTP is not a secure protocol. Okay? FTP is not really secure either, unless you use another protocol with it to secure those. Operating systems, that your operating system is going to have weaknesses to it also, and that you need to be aware of those and update those regularly. Particularly Windows, and that's partly from the massive size of Windows, that no matter what they do to it to make correct things, that they're liable to open something else up on it, and that nobody really knows on it. Linux tends to not have as much security problems, but that's because it's a much smaller operating system and it's easier for somebody to really have a better idea of what's going on there. Windows, there is no one person that knows what all it's built like. There's tons of people out there in Redmond, Washington working on that thing always, and so they go to fix something, they may well cause another weakness appear somewhere else. Network equipment also needs to be updated sometimes on it, that sometimes they'll have vulnerabilities on it. Configuration vulnerabilities, talk about that things aren't configured correctly, from user accounts aren't configured right, that people using easily guessed passwords. Remember, I think it's 60 or 70% of passwords out there are password. Okay. Can y'all guess that password then? Or that it is something else that's really, really simple on it. Okay. And you can set up your rules on your machines that say they have to be better quality passwords than that. But still, But the other problem is people not setting it so difficult people can never remember it. Because we've also figured out that one over time, that doesn't work, that you need to have some way of remembering the password. And most of us are carrying around a ton of passwords that we know. So where they used to tell you don't ever write it down, they've thrown that one out the window because that's impossible. It's don't keep your passwords with the user accounts, okay? So that then it doesn't give it away. But have a system you know on it. If you can come up with a system that you can use your passwords where you can do it to the different things. The other part is you really don't want to use the same password on a lot of different things. Because if your password gets stolen to your bank account, you don't want the same password being used with your credit cards out there, etc. So somebody hacks in and hacks the bank system and gets your passwords that doesn't get them, then they know how to be able to get into all of your credit card accounts or whatever. So you do want them different some, and it doesn't have to be much different because it's just that one won't work with that username that's the same username somewhere else. So I've got a bunch of them, but there's similarity, and it takes a little bit of work for somebody to figure it out. They talk about malware and types of things on that. We've already talked about that, but they talk about viruses, worms, and Trojan horses, and mention those to you again and define those again to you. Keeping viruses and worms separated is always a tricky one for me. Trojan horses, that one I can keep different, but which one's a worm and which one's a virus sometimes is a little difficult. But the worms replicate themselves, where the viruses put copies of themselves into another program. So they're really working similar. Reconnaissance attacks is where they make an attack on your system, not trying to do any harm to it, but just trying to determine openings to your system. Just like in warfare, there's reconnaissance before the battles. There's also reconnaissance done on attacks on computers, that people will go in and just try to see what is a weakness to the system, so they can find the weaknesses before they actually attack the system. So there's those going on out there all the time. A reconnaissance attack in the Army is where they send out a squad just to find the weaknesses with the enemy and know where to attack and where's the enemy really at and where their weak spots are. So you can do a number of those. They talk about a couple of those on it. And you can use all kinds of tools that are legitimate and illegitimate tools out there on the network to do those reconnaissance attacks and to do the real attacks. So you can do all kinds of stuff on it, but you can go out and, for instance, do a reconnaissance one to see what are all the open ports the XYZ company has. Well, when you see which open ports they've got, you go, okay, now I know which ports I can go through, and also knowing which ports are open that you're going, here's the way I can attack if I go in through that port, probably. If they've done their stuff right, they probably misled you on some of the port numbers. And then they talk about access attacks and different types of attacks to go in there. The password attacks with a brute force one. Trust exploitation, where you can go in and get people to let you in without really meaning, and you got to watch out for those. Denial of service attacks, we've talked about those all semester, and that's where they're going to hit your network with a whole bunch of packets coming at it that are going to usually be things that are going to be high priority ones, that it's going to sit there and it's going to go, wait a minute, I've got to do this, and it's not able to do anything else. Those can be distributed also where there's lots of machines throwing the signals in. The distributed one's a much harder one to shut it down on it, where if it's just a straight denial of service attack, all the place that's being attacked has to do is block the traffic from whatever machine that's coming from. Backups, I've emphasized that you all semester already. Do them, and that You need your backups because that will protect you on all of these things we just talked about could be going wrong. And back all the way back to that equipment fails. Do your upgrades regularly, except for be aware sometimes you don't want to do upgrades, so sometimes you want to stay with the software you got. That upgrading it goofs you up. I use a program at home, a freeware program that converts the CDs that I get from church from the video on it to an MP3 file. It wanted to do an update the other week, and when it did the upgrade, it proceeded to then tell me that whenever I use it anymore, and it was freeware out there, that then either I had to buy the program, which they only want to charge like $19 for or something, or that it's going to put a signature onto the thing, marking on the thing that comes out, adding a little bit of stuff onto it saying that I used this freeware program. I'm going, well, I really didn't want that, and the program was working fine. Luckily, I had it on 2 machines, so I'm making sure on the second machine I don't hit upgrade when it says it wants to do an upgrade. So sometimes you don't want to do upgrades, because otherwise the program works perfectly fine for me, so I don't need the upgrade on. And then patches, put your patches on there regularly. That one definitely do, to patch your, particularly Windows, put your patches on there. There have been several times where Microsoft released patches for Windows to fix security problems before it ever got out there in the wild about what the problem was. And then when people started taking advantage of that security hole that was there, it had been 6 months since Microsoft had put the patches out there for it, and people had never patched their systems for it. If they had just put the patches on there when Microsoft sent them down twice a month, that they would have been protected against the attacks that happened at that point. So they hadn't updated, they were open for attacking on it. So do pay attention to those patches. Firewalls, definitely have your firewall there. Firewalls will allow you to do a variety of things to block traffic, and that one of the things is you're going to tell it you want to either allow traffic or deny traffic. So some traffic you want to allow through, and most traffic you want to deny through. If it's not something you really need on there, deny it. You can do that on the packet level and look at the packets and decide whether you accept them or not. You can actually filter on the application and tell it, I'll accept this application or I won't accept that application. You can do it based on the URL to allow stuff from certain URLs or don't allow it for certain URLs. And that you can do stateful packet inspection also. And what that says is that you're only accepting stuff coming in that is a response to something you sent out. And so you can put that requirement on there. There's a number of different firewalls available for you out there. They mentioned about Cisco has security appliances, which are high-level fancy firewalls. There's other companies too. Palo Alto is the big one in that business now. Server-based firewalls that you put on your servers and do all the trafficking there. Your wireless routers and your wired routers are going to come with firewalls built in them. Use those unless you've got a much better firewall inside. If you've gone and bought yourself a Cisco security appliance or a Palo Alto firewall, no, you don't need to worry about the firewall on your wireless router or your wired one, but you've got it covered somewhere. And then there's personal firewalls that come with Windows, etc., or some of your antivirus programs will sell you or give you a firewall also, which are the personal ones. They don't do as much for you, but they will give you some protection. So the higher up you go in this whole process, the better protection you're getting. But the biggest secret of it all is make sure the firewall is on. I have known places that had actually bought several $1,000 firewalls, had them installed there, but they weren't on. It didn't exactly do them any good. Nothing had ever been set up on it of what to protect. And this nice little firewall was sitting there, but it wasn't doing anything. It's sort of like putting locks on the front door to the building, but then we never locked the locks. And we put these real fancy locks on the building, okay? And then wondered why people are getting in the building. Because they walk up, pull on the door, and the door opens, they walk in. Even though it's got that real fancy deadbolt and everything else sitting there, but nobody ever turned the deadbolt to lock the door. Didn't stop them, okay? So then they talk some about those, talk about passwords, which I've already talked about, and about rules on that, and additional rules on passwords, that not only the rules on how you set up your password, but you can set up rules about how the password works, that somebody puts in the wrong password X number of times, you disable their account for so long. But be careful with doing that one. If you do it in a business, and that you put that if they put the password in wrong 3 times, that then you're going to disable their account for 15 minutes. Well, that works real nicely to do other stuff also, because the employees will figure that one out real quick. And one place I worked, that was a large computer company on it. We had 2,000 programmers and similar analysts there. But they had that policy on their computers, and when you showed up at work in the morning, you got there just in time to log on to go to try to get on the computer, which put you, as soon as you went to go in using your username, it clocked you in for there, and that you were there, you'd made it to your desk. So they proceeded to try to log in, put the password in wrong 3 times. They were locked out, so then they went down the hall, got their cup of coffee, and came back. Instead of getting there earlier, getting their cup of coffee, and then getting on the computer we were supposed to, well, the story was, well, I'm locked out, so I might as well go get the cup of coffee because I can't do anything now. And that they'd figured, most people had figured out all they had to do is put in their password wrong 3 times, and they had a 15-minute break. So be careful on that. Make sure it's where it's, and also the problem is that that your caps lock key, somebody pressed it on your machine without you knowing it. It may take you 2 or 3 tries before you realize that's on, although Windows sometimes will tell you, but you don't usually notice that pop-up message popping there. And if you only give them 3 tries, that may not do it for if that's the case, because usually people are going to do it twice with the caps lock on before they realize it's on. And they're already running out of possibilities to even just make their little typo error that people do make. And they talk about using SSH versus Telnet. SSH encrypts the communications across there. Telnet sends it all wide open, unprotected, so any sniffer can see everything goes across on Telnet. Backup and restore files. They talk about that a good little bit right here, and about backing up your configuration files and ways to back them up. We've actually mentioned that, and this is getting specific to the Cisco equipment. So they show lots of pictures now on it, so there's not a whole lot of text on it. But they mention about where you can use TFTP, which I've mentioned to you several times. You could back it up to your TFTP server. You can back it up to a USB device, and you can back it up to your flash file, etc. So you got lots of places to back up to. So that goes through a lot of stuff there. Then they talk about testing it. The ping command works well on that, but remember the ping command is what the DOS attacks are going to use. So in a lot of cases, you can't ping a lot of machines because they've actually got ping blocked in their firewall, and they'll even block it within their network. So sometimes ping won't even work for within your network. And if you try to ping external sources, a lot of them will block pings now just to stop a denial of service attack on it. However, if you've got a decent firewall and you set up the rules on the dedicated firewalls, you can actually set them up where it says, okay, I'll let 5-10 pings come through from a source, because you're normally going to send 5 of them at a time. I'll let 5 or 10 of them come through from a source, and if there's any more than that, then I'm going to block them. So now you can actually ping a lot of places. Y'all can actually ping CNN, because CNN set it up correctly. And so we can sit there and use theirs as a way to verify we really got connectivity with ping. A lot of other places, If you ping to them, you're going to get a return that it was denied or that it couldn't reach it because of the denial. So just be aware of that on it. Ping is a really nice and handy command, but it's been abused. And then the extended ping, which the Cisco devices have, allow you to do more stuff with the ping. You can actually, with the ping, extended ping, you can be sitting on this machine and run it where it's coming off of that machine. You can tell it to ping from a different location of where it appears to come from a different machine, and that it comes from there pinging to the other machine. And that way you can test to see about if that machine is working correctly or not. You can also increase the number of pings it does, which then can get you in trouble. But instead of sending out 5, you can choose a different number on 4 or 5. I can't remember which one it is. When your network is running correctly, go out and measure all your measurements on it. So then when you think it's not working right, you can do measurements again, compare them, and see where your problems are. If you hadn't done the measurements when it was working right, you don't have anything to compare back to know what is wrong, other than intuitively you know it's really slow. Okay? But if you got a baseline, you can go, well, it's this amount slower. Trace route command they talk about. We've talked about those already in here. Basically it just does ping, but tells you every router it crosses on the way to wherever it's going. It is trace RT in Windows. It is trace ROUTE in Linux Unix. Linux Unix has always had long file names and long command names that you can go 254 characters, 254, 256, I can't remember which. Where DOS had the limit of 8 characters, and Windows is built on DOS. So they had to trace route spelled out. It's more than 8 characters, so that didn't work. So they abbreviated route to RT when they put it onto DOS. So same command, just 2 different ones. ipconfig in Windows is the one you use there, but if you're on Linux Unix, what's the command on there? It's ifconfig, and that will give you your configuration of your network adapter. Okay? IP on Windows, because they've gone with that, because that's everything was Internet Protocol at the point when DOS Windows came along. Linux goes back to Unix, and remember Unix was from the beginning of TCP/IP, and they weren't looking at across the network, they were just looking at the interface on your computer, so F for interface instead of Internet Protocol. Okay? And so that's where the F comes in there versus the P. Threw me for a little bit initially when I saw that one. I don't think they even tell you about that one here, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. That's what y'all pay me the big bucks for. Which will get you as much good getting out of my bank account probably as getting out of y'all's bank account. Show commands, they go through and talk about a number of those that are available to you. Some of these show commands you're not going to use unless you really get high up into Cisco somewhere working, and if just from this book you're not going to be at that level. Show running config, yes you will use, and you have used. You learned that one back in chapter 1, and you've used it all book. Show ARC, probably not going to use. Show interfaces, you may use that one. If y'all take the rest of the Cisco courses, you'll use show interfaces in the other classes. I think you may have used it on a previous assignment too. Because they also had you do show interface brief, if I remember, which is really the one I like better than show interfaces. Show interface brief just shows just the basic information about your interfaces. Show interfaces gives you way too much information most of the time. Show IP route would be another similar one, and that's just showing your routing tables. Okay, I've never have liked route there. I really want it to be routing, but route's what they came up with. But showing the routing table, which does show your routes to other places. So you use that one some. Show version, You may well use that one at some point, but it does that one every time you start the router or the switch, turn them on. That it actually does a show version as it's coming up, because it gives you the version information of your version of iOS on there and everything. So that's always useful if you want that one. They go back and talk about IP config, which I just talked about, and remember, and so they show you what you can do with that on the Cisco equipment. Show CDP neighbors, tells you about the other machines around your router. Not really a thing that they ought to be throwing in this class, because that's above and beyond y'all here. Then they talk about show interface brief. I don't know why they didn't talk about it back there on show interface, because that would have been the logical place to put it. They talk about the debug command, which will give you detailed information if you're having certain problems. Instead of just giving the reply back on it, that it'll give you more. So for instance, debug IP ICMP tells you about your pings, but gives you detailed information about them out there, and that you can tell better what you've got. If you turn on debugging, it's telling you details about everything, and you turn it on for the router or switch. Make sure you turn it back off, or you're going to be buried in superfluous information. You don't want to leave it on for long, because it will go verbose and give you tons of data. So it's something you turn off and on. Then they go through and show you a little bit on troubleshooting. They talk about resolving it or escalating it. What that is it something you can fix, or do you need to pass it on to a higher level? Just like if you call a support desk. There's a lot of times with the knowledge level y'all have now, you don't want to talk to level 1. Your knowledge level on it, and you've already done everything they're going to tell you at level 1. You need to get to level 2, and that sometimes you can tell them that when you call them that I need to talk to somebody on level 2, and they'll transfer you on up. And sometimes they'll tell you, no, we've got to go through all of this, and then I'll decide if I can't solve it, that I'll pass it on up. And so you spend 30 minutes answering their questions of, do you have the machine plugged in? Have you turned it on? Do you have anything sitting on the keyboard, etc.? Which are good questions to ask the average user. And then they talk about cables and about duplex and half duplex, and making sure you don't mix up those on that. Make sure you got your ports on both ends set the same way. Though in most cases you can just set it to auto config on that part. Make sure you got your wires done right on your cables. Addressing issues, make sure the addressing's all correctly and that you're on the correct network, and those are questions could pop up for you, even some on it, and be aware of those. So knowing your IP addressing. Gateway, make sure you do have a gateway set up on your machine, which is using that quad 0 address on your routers and switches, or on your PCs. Remember, you just go into your network setting and that you've got a gateway there. If you don't have a gateway out, all your machine is going to be able to do is work within your network, but not get you anywhere outside your network. That you have got to have a gateway for stuff that doesn't work in the network, for it to know where to send it to, because it doesn't know beyond your own network or the immediate adjacent ones. DNS issues, we've already talked about those, so won't really talk about that. And we did better going through the chapter than I thought we would, because that's 70 pages and 60 minutes plus told you about the final. Any questions on that? So there's a lot of stuff in there, but it's not as much as it really looks like. It is long and a lot there, but most of it is coming back and just putting it all together for what we went through the book doing. So the first chapter of the book told you about what networks were and told you a little bit about them. The last chapter came back and looked at the networks again and saw how everything in between, and the other 9 chapters all came back together. So basically they put the whole book together into the last chapter. Okay? Any questions on that? Tuesday we will work on cabling, and that you all do your cabling, and then Thursday, if we need to still work on cabling, we'll have that date there, or if y'all have any questions, or we'll just not have class that day. And then the following Tuesday we'll do the final. Okay? And then y'all get a break for a week before summer semester. There's no long break involved here. We only got a break, a 1 week break in there. And I've got to get my classes set up for summer, so I won't get much of a chance to do much of a break there, because I'm trying to get classes still, everything finished up in them for this semester still. And I haven't even had a chance to even think about next semester. Luckily though, I don't think I'm teaching anything new, so pretty much it's transfer my classes over, and then change all the dates in them, and that's what will take some time to get stuff to the summer schedule. And so I haven't even looked at coding on that, other than I know B session, which is what I should be teaching all of my classes in if they don't throw me something odd on me at the last minute. We'll start May the 15th, and then I think we get out something like July the 12th or July the 18th or something, 15th, 18th, because I'm in Paris, France from July the 12th through July the 17th, I think it is, and right at that spot there, my classes end at the tail end of it or thereabouts. The longer session goes through the end of July, the 10-week session, which is A, and it goes through the end of July, but I specifically choose the 8-week session so I can actually have a couple of weeks off in the summer if I want. Usually we have 2 weeks between spring and summer, but we don't this time. So I'm definitely glad I went with 8 weeks for summer. Although, like I say, I am taking 4 days or something to go to Paris there at the end of it, because I'm going to the Kiwanis convention over there, and Kiwanis is paying half the cost of my trip or so, or thereabouts. I couldn't pass that one up. And I do have wireless in my hotel over there, so I'll still be online every day and everything, because I'm at a Hyatt that says it's got wireless. Now, how good of internet they got over there, that's another question. So, but when I was in China, it all worked fine for me. So it should be fine for me over there. Any questions? If not, I will see y'all Tuesday, and we will do cabling. So you can be getting your fingers in shape over the weekend.
On the cable, we're bring our own notes, or you on the board?
If y'all will remind me that day, I will put up there the color notes. Okay, but you can bring your own notes also, but it needs to be written stuff. Okay, but you can't use the computer,
Type
and
it out and print it.
you can't, huh?
You can't type it out and print it.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
Do you want to look at mine first, like before?
Okay. As long as, but if y'all got it printed out with the list of codes, that'll be okay.
Okay.
And that y'all can use the book if you want, but you can't use your neighbor. You don't have a helpline to call on your cell phone. You can't use your cell phone during it. And if you need my help on it, tell me what it is you think you got a question on, and I will tell you if answering it will cost you any points or not, and then answer you if you still want an answer. Okay? I won't dock you points for me giving you an answer without warning you first, and also give you an opportunity to ask the question, because it may be something that you run into there that I'll go, yeah, we may have gone over it, but maybe you didn't exactly know how, that from what we did or whatever, or that it's something unique, because sometimes something odd turns up on it. And so I'll tell you if I'm going to charge you or not for me to answer it for you. Everybody should make hundreds on it. If you